we talked about there being 4 reasons as to why I think the study of Jewish history is important. The first reason is because people know stuff about Jewish history, but they don't know where it goes. Yeah, a lot of people either went to a Jewish school, had some basic Jewish education, you've heard about Jewish festivals, there's Purim, there's Hanukkah, and a lot of people know bits, but they don't know how to put the bits together and make it all fit in. That's the first reason why I think it's important. The second idea is the idea of Jewish history is really our family history, right? As much as we like to think that life and the world began when I was born, in actuality, life and the universe and world history preceded all of us, right? Our history is really not even just a history of our family. It's not the history of us, once we came to Australia. Our history goes back many hundreds, thousands of years. That's our family story. Okay, so I think it's also important for people to understand where have we come from and also where are we going. But that's not really tonight's topic. Where we come from is tonight's topic. The third idea is the idea of Jewish history is really world history. Unlike anyone else in the world, we've been everywhere, man, right? We started off in one place, we've traveled the whole world, and so the history of the Jews is really the history of the world, because you can track the progression of civilizations based upon the movements of the Jews. Hang on a second. For example, like when you think about all the great civilizations in the world, the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, America, Russia, not coincidentally, the Jews have been a part of all of those stories.
I'm curious to know if other religions know that or notice it or advertise it to their followers in
No, and no.
Really?
Yes. Okay. The fourth reason is the idea of learning from Jewish history. The nice thing about Jewish history is you can get caught up in the details, but you can also take a step back and look at it from the big picture. There is an arc of Jewish history, right? There's the events as they happen in the micro, and then there is a macro picture of what all of Jewish history looks like from 30,000 feet. Okay, that's very valuable because when we talk about things like seeing the hand of history, seeing the hand of God in history, it's hard to see that on a day-by-day basis. But when you take a step back and you look at 1,000 years, 2,000 years at a time, all of a sudden you see patterns and you go, hang on a sec. There's something up with that. Okay, that's the fourth reason to learn Jewish history. Okay, I presented this idea last week that the world was created for a reason and mankind was created for a reason. We have a purpose. And God promises us that we will eventually achieve our purpose. So if you wanted to put world history on a graph, it would look like this, right? As time goes on, mankind will get closer and closer to achieving their purpose, which is also the world's purpose. Okay? I also mentioned last week the idea that it's not really a straight line. Really, it looks more like this. Right? Sometimes we're getting closer, sometimes we're kind of having setbacks.
Like inflation.
Yes, like the stock market, like everybody's lives.
Yeah.
Good days and bad days, but you hope over the long run there's more good days and bad days.
And what's the world's purpose?
Oh, good question. The world's purpose, I would say that the purpose of the world is to reveal Hashem into the world and for people to get to the highest spiritual level possible, which means to have a personal relationship with Hashem. That's what we're here for, right? We're here to work out that we're not animals, we're actually godly beings. Okay, so we're here to work that out as individuals, and we're here to work that out as mankind. And everything in the world is here to support that. Okay, so in terms of the reality of what Jewish history looks like, I think this is a pretty accurate representation. Okay, for a while we were going up, then we kind of went down, and towards the end we start going up again. Okay, last week we covered
Do we drop down again now?
the first two
Recent
lines.
days?
Okay, what's that?
Do we drop down because of recent days or not, or are we still staying up there?
So when you look at it like this,
Okay.
even on the up bit, there can be down bits. Right? But in terms of the big picture, in terms of the giant arc of Jewish history, of world history, yeah. And if we had to put some dates and faces on this, I would say that first up bit there, the top of that would be probably the destruction of the first temple. maybe the destruction of the second temple. We could talk about that. The down line here is basically the 2,000 years of exile. So that would be from about the year 0 to about the year 1950, give or take, maybe 1930, depending on exactly when it counts. And then everything up after that would be sort of like 1940 something onwards, post-Holocaust, let's call it. And this bit's what we're going to talk about tonight, basically. A little bit of the downslope, but that's really where we're up to in our slides. Okay, so here's what we did last week. We started with when the Jews entered the land of Israel. That's the period of the Judges. We went all the way through. We took detours to talk a little bit about Christianity and Islam, and we got up to about the year 1800. Okay, so tonight this is what we're going to look at.
Actually, is there any chance you can go back a page?
No chance whatsoever.
I fancy.
Do you want me to autograph it for you?
Maybe after. Thank you. All good.
Okay.
It'll be a background pic.
If you want the slides, I can just send them to you.
That's
Okay, so tonight this is the bit we're going to focus on, which is from about 1850 on to the present day. And again, you can see that's the arc up there, and that's kind of the kick up about 1940, 1950.
Oh, this is gonna be interesting.
All right. So we are going to start with European racism. We're going to have to jump a little bit around in terms of chronological here, but I want to focus on European racism. Just a sec, I've just got to let someone in. Knocking on the virtual door.
Where's Papa Andrew?
He has a family commitment tonight.
He quit.
He's no longer employed.
We're taking over the house.
Okay. All right, we got that. Okay. So, we're picking up about 1890. So last week we talked about the idea of edicts of tolerance in Europe. At the end of the Middle Ages into the Enlightenment, you had people like Napoleon come along and say, all of this racism that we've been practicing for the last 2,000 years, all of this intolerance, all of this feudal hierarchical system, right? We're throwing all of that out and we're moving to the idea of all people have inalienable rights, the greatness of all individuals, yeah, freeing the serfs, deposing the kings, things like this is the birth of democracy that we would recognize, right? This is the America is created in this period of time, right? This is a major transition point in Europe away from the old ways of doing things and the old ways of thinking to the new ways of doing things and the new ways of thinking.
So Napoleon was Middle Age or Western Europe? Oh, no.
Napoleon was Western Europe.
Western Europe, okay.
I mean, it's French.
Yeah.
He was after the French Revolution.
Yep.
He was a person who filled the vacuum. Right? They got rid of the king. The problem is they didn't know what was going to come next. Napoleon came along and conquered a lot of Europe, but he conquered it in a kind of nice way. Like he brought a lot of freedoms to most of Europe they hadn't experienced up until that point.
Maybe I watched that film.
This is also the at this point the church has basically lost all of its power. The church was the major power in Europe for about 1,000, 1,500 years. The church is basically in decline at this point as well, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so but the question was, and Napoleon spoke this out very nicely, exactly what do you do with the Jews? Because everybody else in Europe was happy to be nationalistic. I'm French, I'm German, I'm Russian, I'm Polish, yeah? The problem was the Jews. Because the Jews always felt and always acted and always thought of themselves as a nation within a nation. We were Jewish, but we were also French. We were Jewish, but we were also English. So that was kind of a conundrum because we didn't neatly fit into any of the boxes. Okay?
So if someone asks you what your ethnicity is, so it is true to say that you are Jewish, ethnically Jewish.
It's not true.
But what do you say?
What does it mean? Judaism is not just a religion. It's not just an ethnicity.
It's a bit of both.
It's a bit of both and a lot of a third.
Would you say...
I don't have just one nation. I mean, I'm a bit of a mishmash at the moment, but I'd say I'm Jewish, and then I'm English.
There's one of those questions
Yes.
It's one of those questions they ask kids in school. Are you a Jewish Australian or an Australian Jew?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like
I was never asked that
Oh, I was
question.
never asked that either.
well, you went to the wrong schools, but
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so first thing I want to talk about tonight is the Dreyfus Affair. The Dreyfus Affair was very, very important. Essentially, Alfred Dreyfus was a French Jewish officer. Okay, he was an officer in the French army, but he was also Jewish. In 1894, he gets accused of treason. Now, he didn't do it. He got exonerated 10 years later or so, but at the time, he was accused of being disloyal to handing French secrets to the Germans. And so it was a national story, the trial of this Jew who had, quote unquote, betrayed his country, France. And it was pretty obvious he was being framed. In fact, they caught the person who really was the guilty party later on. But this was this was an example of the way Europeans thought about Jews. Like any excuse to call a Jew a traitor, that wasn't even considered racist. That was considered, yeah, of course, because Jews have dual loyalties. Right? You see this also with the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Yeah? 1903, the Russian secret police write this book, come up with this idea that there is a global conspiracy of Jews, and every 100 years there's a big meeting, all the Jews get together, and they decide how they're going to run the world for the next 100 years. Yeah, Jews control the banks, Jews control Hollywood, Jews control, everything. You can still buy it on Amazon.
There's a film on that guy, by the way. The top guy.
Dreyfus?
Yeah.
Very possibly.
What?
There's a film on him.
Yeah,
An
Roman
officer
Polanski.
and a spy, it's called.
Isn't there a Mark Dreyfus? He's like.
Yes, he's the Attorney General.
Oh, Attorney General.
He's an MP as well. There's a Mark
Yeah.
Dreyfus.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
MP of Morty
Roman
Allen.
Polanski.
Is he Morty Alec?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know where his electorate is. In any case, so the Protocol of the Elders of Zion, people liked the idea of this being true, even though it wasn't. It was complete fake. The Times of London in the 1920s did a big expose that it was fake. In the 1920s, 1930s, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was the second best-selling book in America. What do you think the first best-selling book was? Yeah, the Bible. The Bible hadn't been written yet.
Yeah, hadn't been written yet. That's right.
Tolkien was still at war.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the book about again?
It is a story about how the Jews control the world, and every 100 years the Jews get together and they make a plan for how they're going to run the world for the next 100 years. So it's like it's the secret, it's the dark government, it's the shadows, the Jews in the shadows.
So around that time is when things were subliminal messaging keep pumping into people's minds to build up to 1930s or so.
I wouldn't say it like that. I would say that despite the fact that Europe had largely become free of racism, it was still okay to be anti-Semitic.
Okay.
Like that was considered appropriate. That was culturally appropriate anti-Semitism.
Okay.
In the same way today, that there are things that it's just not okay to say about some people,
Yeah.
but it's okay to say about Jews or Israel.
Define okay.
Like if you're saying, say,
In good company, you wouldn't be looked down upon. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's the
I'm
reality.
Just saying, what is your definition of being okay?
Socially acceptable.
Yeah.
Not like God says it's okay.
I'm just feeling a theme here. Like it's
Yes, there is a
planting
theme.
and it's gonna like
There is a theme.
bobble around and
Yes. Yes.
keep us
You're
minds.
correct.
Yeah.
By the way, Henry Ford of Ford fame was one of the biggest proponents of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. He was basically responsible for bringing it to America and printing it. He was a rabid anti-Semite. Not a nice guy. Okay, this basically gets us up to World War One. World War One began in summer of 1914, and it was the largest, bloodiest war ever. Probably 10 million people died, 20 million people injured, and it really changed the world because it was kind of like a transition point from the old world to the new world in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the nations of Europe. Right? Much before this, you couldn't have had a world war because you didn't have nations, you had peoples doing their own thing. it was only after nationalism in Europe and you had the creation of Germany and France and all the other countries that you could then have alliances between countries. That then when one country got pulled into war, all the other countries got pulled into war, and hence you had a world war. They said about 1.5 million Jewish soldiers who fought in the First World War, but they fought on all the different sides because there were Jews living in all the countries in Europe. Yeah, so you have these stories about Jewish German soldiers shooting at Jewish French soldiers, and they would have these, like, they'd yell out Shema. So in case the other guy was a Jew, he wouldn't shoot you because you were Jewish, right? Because Jewish soldiers didn't want to shoot other Jews, even if they were of another nationality. And of course, from our point of view, the most significant part of World War I is that it directly led to World War II, right? Germany losing World War I and the way they were treated, the reparations and everything else, the Treaty of Versailles, basically led to the rise of Hitler, which then led to World War II.
How's that supposed to help you if you yelling Shema? Because if someone hates Jews, then that would be like.
No, if the other guy was a Jew.
And you knew what you were
If the other guy wasn't Jew, he didn't know what you were yelling.
Could be like,
They don't understand.
get away in another language. Like, you wouldn't know.
Oh. Okay, so I did.
If someone yells something French word to me, I wouldn't know what it is. Could be anything.
I would think that's a compliment. So
But if you're Jewish,
You
if-
don't like me.
It sounds right.
you know how, like, when you're walking the airport or a foreign country and you see a guy with a yarmulke, and like it catches your eye because
yeah.
like no one else notices it, but you're like, Jew.
Yeah.
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 So when someone yells Shema in a crowd, no one else turns around, but all Jews go.
Yeah.
Who said that?
Yeah.
Do you think, I know it's a bit off topic, it's a similar topic, but off topic ahead of time in today's times. Do you think what's happening in Europe could end up being like a World War III scenario in a sense?
I don't want to answer that now.
Oh.
That's a complete distraction.
Oh, okay.
Okay, next thing that happened, the Russian Revolution. Again, the Russian Revolution was really, on one hand, it was connected to World War I and whether Russia would play a role in that. On the other hand, it was really the culmination of bad government over generations, specifically the Tsars, and the Russian people deciding they wanted a change of government. So 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, led by Lenin and Trotsky, of course, good Jewish boys. And so again, nothing's ever good for the Jews, right? Life under the Tsars was very bad for the Jews. Life under communism was even worse. Yeah, communism basically made any religion forbidden. And so by 1921, they really, Judaism in Russia had basically been stamped out. And there were many millions of Jews living in Russia, particularly in the Pale of Settlement, that fell under the curtain of communism.
And that's when a lot of the people decided to not tell people that they were Jewish or pretend they was something else.
Well, you weren't allowed to be Jewish or practice it, so some people went underground with it and kept it secret. Some people just assimilated and, effectively stopped being Jewish.
Why did they do that?
Why did they do what?
Why did they stop people from practicing their religion?
Because communism holds that everybody is equal, right? We're all in this together. It's based on socialism, and therefore there is no place for religion. There's no God. It's a completely secular philosophy, and you're not different. You're not special. We're all the same.
So they didn't want anyone to have any sort of independence or knowledge that could be.
You were a citizen of Mother Russia. That was your identity. You didn't have any other identity. You weren't Jewish, you weren't Christian, you weren't rich, you weren't poor, you weren't anything. You were Russian. That was your new identity. Yeah.
And then the pogroms came as well.
Yes. Throughout this whole time, there's always problems throughout Europe. Because every time something goes wrong, who do you blame? You blame the Jews. Right? World War I, every time Russia lost a battle, who do you blame? You blame the Jews. Yeah.
I feel like everything now, it's the Jews' fault. Especially with what happened now.
Yes.
Everyone's blaming the Jews for
Right.
everything. It's like
No matter what they do,
no matter
it's the
what,
wrong thing.
The world hates us.
Yes.
And there will always be more of them than there are of us.
But we'll always be right. So that's cool.
Well, that's another thing.
That's what people
Okay,
say
we're going
in
to talk about that
science.
maybe later if we get to it.
Yeah.
We have to get through this material first. Okay,
Scientology.
and that really gets us to the Holocaust. Yeah, 1939 to 1945, 44, 45. Again, the Holocaust really was, what's that?
It started. Yeah.
Again, officially started 39, Nuremberg laws 33. You know, you can work out how far back you want to go. Really, at the end of World War One, the stage was set for World War Two. It was just a matter of time.
It's like boiling a pot up.
Okay.
It's all-
Yeah, it's inevitable. It's just a question of when.
Yeah.
And by 1942, the Nazis have the final solution. Yeah, you know, it took the Germans a few years to work out that it was too slow to shoot all the Jews. That was going to take too long, right? So the final solution was, how do you kill as many Jews as fast as possible? So that was when, there were 6 death camps that the Nazis had where they would gas Jews. Yeah, because it worked out that was the fastest way to kill Jews. 24 concentration camps, 6 death camps. There are about 4 million Jews who were killed in the 6 death camps. Yeah, Auschwitz is probably the most famous that people know of. You've got to understand from the Jewish point of view,
I think Buchenwald
was also up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. 70% of European Jewry was killed in the Holocaust. Let me say that differently. 70% of European Jewry was murdered in the Holocaust. Yeah? 70%. That is an insane number of people.
That's insane.
Right? You take any group of people and you remove 70%, that should be the end of those people. And the Holocaust really was not only the physical death of many, many Jews. For a lot of people, it was also the ultimate psychological blow. Right? Germany was the most culturally advanced nation in Europe. Right? Europe was, this is after the Enlightenment. This is after, humanity is at the highest point. Now we're so enlightened, we're such thinkers, we're so, right? Germany had more PhDs than any other country in the world. Yeah? And still it was okay, not okay, still it was condoned and appropriate to kill Jews. Yeah? Like, what has to happen already for Jews to not be everybody else's scapegoat, doormat, excuse?
I'm sorry to say, but I'm feeling it now. That is seriously now is what I'm feeling.
Right. So we're going to have to talk about that, which I would like to talk about it tonight if we get there. Okay. So things are not great in Europe, to say the least. Things are pretty damn bad by the end of the 1940s. Let's jump to America. Okay. America's a really interesting place because when the founding fathers established America, they were all very religious people. They're religious Christians, but they thought of America as the new promised land. They thought they were Puritans, they were escaping religious persecution in Europe, and they came to America with the idea of we are like the Jews leaving Egypt and going to the promised land. Okay? The founding fathers, there's a lot of stuff in America that has biblical origins. The money says in God we trust. One of the 2 languages considered was Hebrew. Hebrew was going to be the national language of America. They didn't want English to be the language because they were getting away from England. England was the enemy, right? Hebrew was considered to be the language of the future. English was the language of the past. So by the 1880s, there was about 270,000 Jews in America. Most of those had come from Germany. But between 1881 and World War I, so let's say 1914, you're talking about something like 2.5 million Jews coming from Europe to America. Okay, mostly from Russia. Those were the poor refugees, right? They were the people arriving in Ellis Island with nothing but the shirts on their backs, living in the Upper East Side, the Lower East Side of Manhattan, right? Tenement buildings, all that sort of stuff. A lot of them, most of them only spoke Yiddish, right? Didn't speak English. you have this phenomenon of they were mostly religious because they'd come from Eastern Europe where Jews were religious. They came to America, they were impoverished. America had a 6-day work week. Sunday was the day off, so Shabbos was a normal work day. And for all those religious Jews, they had to choose between keeping Shabbos or having a job and not starving. Right? That's where the major wave of assimilation, where religious Jews stopped being religious, was when they came to America and they had to choose between having a job or being religious. Right? That's a real choice. And when they came to America, there wasn't really much Jewish infrastructure at all. We talked about last week that after the destruction of the first temple, when the Jews were exiled to Babylon, when they got to Babylon, there was a functioning Jewish community already, right? There were already shuls and schools and all that sort of stuff. Jewish delis, supermarkets, that sort of stuff, right? Pizza stores, bakeries, it was all there. When the Jews from Eastern Europe came to America, there was nothing Jewish in America, right? That didn't help with the assimilation problem. It wasn't till the 1930s and 1940s that a Jewish day school system built up, that big rabbis from Europe also came to America and set up communities and schools and shuls and things like that. But for a good, 30 to 50 years, America was a wasteland, a Jewish wasteland.
Did they concentrate only on the east side, or did they start expanding out?
So the majority of Jews lived on the Lower East Side in New York, but
You can't all fit there.
they squashed them in pretty tightly. There were Jews who spread out to other parts of the country. Remember, this is still the way America works is that the coasts, it's a bit like Australia, right? Most of the people live on the coasts, and then gradually people moved into the interior, right? That was like the Wild West, moving into the middle. So as people moved into the middle, Jews also moved with them. So there were Jewish communities in Kansas, in Nebraska, in Kentucky, in all these sorts of middle American places. Some of them did.
Has a large Jewish,
Where?
That like St. Louis.
St. Louis,
The train line started parading through as well.
Correct. So that was where the land was. That was where the opportunities were.
Jobs.
So if you were, entrepreneurial in nature, there were Jews who went out, who went to those places as well. But the majority stayed in New York. Yeah.
There's still evidence down there. The shuls.
Yeah, I'm saying.
The shuls they built are all still there, and the buildings they lived in. Some of the delis and that, and the shops.
There were Jewish communities all over America in the wackiest places, and it's not because they were built recently, it's because they're there from the 1930s and 40s and 50s when Jews moved out to these places 100%.
Right, but even from 100 years ago, if you go now in the Lower East Side, you can still see a lot of the evidence in the history of the Jews that came there.
They won't have a heritage on, they won't be allowed to destroy them.
It hasn't been.
Yeah. America is very significant because in the last 2,000 years since we left the land of Israel, we've been to a lot of different places. And America is America has been the place that's been kindest to the Jews, and the Jews have been most successful. Now, it's not because it wasn't anti-Semitism in America. There has, and there is still. Yeah? But compared to the other places we went, America, they call it a Medina Shel Chesed, like a country full of kindness. Yeah, America has been an amazing place for the Jews, and you see how successful the Jews have been in America. In terms of political involvement, in terms of commercial success, in terms of wealth, in terms of influence. Yeah.
We should actually just start.
Where we are, 0.2% of the population or whatever. Look in media and entertainment. Look in, everywhere you turn. Science, absolutely. Yeah, Jews have been very, very successful in America, and America has prospered also because of the Jews. Hey, Gabby.
I don't want to be negative. I mean, okay, just a side point.
Yes.
The worst thing is a Jew hater.
Yes.
And Jonah Hill, who's Jewish, who was the creator of many TV shows, is unfortunately, there was a video that came out about him who said he's scared of Jews and he himself is Jewish. And so he's now perpetrating this hate, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
So,
Nobody listens to Jonah Hill.
Yes. Look, you're right.
Yeah.
You know, the
There's worse than Jonah Hill.
I know there's
Bernie
like-
Sanders is
the is about as Jewish as a ham sandwich as Ben
George
Shapiro
Soros.
says. Yeah.
You know, these are
Yes,
sort of
yes.
very high profile.
Yes.
self-made Jews.
You know, the downside of being in a place like America, where it is so accepting to Jews, is that you have people who assimilate and become self-hating Jews, right? And they don't see themselves as Jews living in America. They see themselves as Americans and not at all Jewish,
He's
right?
also
They have
a-
had that mind shift of who they are and where they come from. Yeah.
So we're to Zionism now?
Okay. So that was America. Let's talk about Zionism.
But other than that, the Jews in America have done amazing things.
On balance,
Yeah.
again, you know, America's not our home,
No.
right? But of all the places we've been while we were not at home, it's been a pretty good place to be.
Yeah.
What about Australia?
Australia also. Just the numbers here are much less compared to America. Yeah.
I'm sure you'll mention this later, but this question of where are we meant to feel safe if we can't even feel safe in our
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just go back to the end of the 1800s. We're back in Europe, and in the 1870s and 1880s, there was a movement called Chavevei Zion, the Lovers of Zion, and this was really in Russia, and people started thinking about this idea of going back to Palestine, going back to the land of Israel. Yeah, things in Europe were bad, particularly in Russia, and there was this resurgent idea of people raising money and people moving back to Israel, okay, the land of Israel. So you start having these waves of aliyah, yeah, of people moving from Europe back to Palestine. Now there was nothing in Palestine, right? There had been an unbroken Jewish community there for 2,000 years since the time we were thrown out of the destruction of the Second Temple, but it wasn't infrastructure. It wasn't Jewish cities. It was individuals, small families.
So when you say raising money, not only to cover travel costs
Yes.
to get there, but are they buying land off the Ottoman Empire?
Yes, they're buying land, and philanthropists in Europe are paying Jews to move to Palestine and giving them stipends literally to live because they would starve to death otherwise. So the two best examples are Moses Montefiore, yeah, in London. He made his money in finance, stockbroking, that sort of stuff. He made so much money he retired at the age of 40. And he dedicated the rest of his life to philanthropy. So he purchased a lot of Jewish land in what was then Palestine, in Israel, and he built up cities. Yeah, you might have heard of the Yemin Moshe, just outside the old city. There's a big windmill there. Okay, maybe not. But there's a number of communities in Mea Shearim. Yeah, these were communities that were set up. That they built communities and they paid people to go and live in them as a way of encouraging people and making it possible for poor Jews in Eastern Europe to move to Palestine. Baron Edward Rothschild, also Germans made the money in banking. Also gave a lot of money, to encourage, to support, to make possible Jews moving to Palestine. Between 1881 and the First World War, 60,000 Jews moved from mostly Eastern Europe to Palestine. First and second waves of Aliyah. Again, they weren't self-funded. They were being sponsored, they were being supported by other European Jews.
And the Ottoman Empire was okay with these waves of Jews.
The Jew is back.
They didn't care.
Better late than
Didn't care at all. There was nothing going on in Palestine at that
It
time.
wasn't a massively populated place.
There was nothing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Twain has a famous piece where he visited Palestine in the 1880s. It's like, this place is a wasteland.
So who's that?
Mark Twain.
Oh, Mark Twain, yeah.
Clemens, Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Yeah.
Is there any sort of maps that outline at this time, sort of 1870-ish, where populations were and what their sort of denomination?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I didn't want to get bogged down in that sort of detail here, But yes, there is. It's all documented. So between 1880s and World War One, you have about 2.5 million Jews who left Russia. The majority of those went to America, but a small percentage went to Palestine. Okay.
This is a side note, but to live to the age of 100 in those times.
Yeah.
Hang on, who lived
I mean-
to 100? Which one?
Most of Montefiore, unless we don't
It-
have birth.
It helps to be fabulously wealthy, though.
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
saying.
but still, back
When you
then,
consider-
didn't they have those diseases?
Most
and
people
everything
died of things like malnutrition,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or sickness.
Well, look at the
Yeah,
size
like
of it.
cholera.
5 million.
I always wondered about that. I think that might. You know how in like medieval paintings, how the women are all very large, because that was considered beautiful.
Most of them had cancer.
Okay.
Actually,
There was a time when sometimes your size was actually associated with wealth.
With wealth, it
Correct,
was.
correct.
Yeah,
Because
so
it meant that you had
so
enough
he probably
food.
wasn't
It
that
meant you
big.
had enough food to
Yeah.
eat, right? Everybody else was starving and emaciated. So if you wanted to show how important and wealthy you were,
And
large.
jacket could
He
be
probably
very
didn't
thick,
look like that.
and he could be
That's what I say. I wonder if that was the style of.
But
You know,
also
of-
lived to close
They
to
used to make
90
really
or
thick jackets back in
91.
those days because that could make you look big.
Oh my god, what was wrong if he was actually a bit rotund?
Mark Beeson was one.
Okay, we're not judging anyone.
And this is completely irrelevant to the
I
story,
don't
but
think
it's
so.
So don't say
surname.
So what?
You're right, I did.
Huh?
I spelt it like the aged care home here.
Montefiore.
Yes.
No, it's Monte Fiore.
There's one too many eyes.
Yeah. That's okay. We won't
Yes.
hold it against you.
Just
And
Google
even
that.
if you did, I'm not changing it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of Zionism. What we've seen so far really is one kind of Zionism, which is the idea of Jews wanting to escape Russia specifically and go to either America or to Palestine.
Who gave him the knighthood, sorry?
The Queen or
Yeah.
King, he was knighted. I don't remember
really
which one,
right?
but one of them.
But-
I mean, he did a lot of philanthropy in England as well.
Yeah.
Why was there no massive push by a Jewish population 200 years before this or 500 years before this to go back to Israel?
So two reasons.
Good question.
One, things in Europe weren't that bad. As things got worse in Europe, particularly in Russia, right, the Palace Settlement, the Tsars, Cantonist decrees, all that sort of stuff, Jews were looking for a way out. They were looking for somewhere to go, and there weren't that many options. Right, going somewhere else in Europe, well, we tried that game for 1,000 years, and it didn't work. You just ended up back in the same place, different place, same problem. Yeah. So Palestine was seen as, you know what? That's actually the Jewish homeland. Remember, Napoleon's come through Europe with the Edicts of Toleration, and it's all about nationalism. You German people, you deserve a homeland, a country for you called Germany. You French people, you deserve a homeland for you, you're French. You Jews, I don't know what to do with you. But you're just like, hang on a sec, we have a homeland too. It's in Palestine,
Yeah.
right? And again, Jews in Europe didn't, certainly Jews in Eastern Europe didn't have the financial resources to make that happen on their own. But when someone else said, who wants to go to Palestine? I'll pay for it. Ooh, me. Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, this is also largely before communism, when it was possible to leave Russia. If you had the money, you could leave. It wasn't a problem. Right? Once communism came in, then, that became a different problem. But, okay.
Honestly, if someone pays, I'll go tomorrow.
Give
Okay.
you $200, I'll move to the Sudan.
Okay, let's talk about Zionism.
Set up shop there.
Start your own hotel.
There are three kinds of Zionism that I want to mention. The first one is the easiest to understand. That's religious Zionism. Okay? Since the Jews were thrown out of Israel 2,000 years ago, 3 times a day we have prayed to go back to Israel. Every time we bench after eating food, Birkat HaMazon, right, we talk about Israel. Lashana Haba Yerushalayim, the end of the Pesach Seder, the end of the Yom Kippur service, next year in Jerusalem. Right? This has been the national dream of the Jewish people to go back to Palestine. We never gave up on Israel. Right? We always knew it was our homeland. It was just a matter of time until we were going back there. So there was always within the Jewish people a sense of religious Zionism. We want to go back to Israel. That's our homeland. Okay, that's the easiest to understand. Another kind of Zionism that sprung up at this time was what I would call idealistic Zionism. all of the isms in Europe were being developed. Communism, socialism, Bundism, all that sort of stuff is being born around here. And there were Jews who got caught up in those sorts of things, and they wanted to build a country based upon those things. Yeah? Israel very nearly became a communist country. The reason why Russia supported Israel in the early days was because they thought it was going to be a communist country. There were a lot of Jewish communists and Marxists and socialists and Bundists who came from Europe to Israel with the idea of setting up an ism, right? Using one of those political ideologies, and that would be their fulfillment of Tikkun Olam. That would be how the ideal society, solve all the problems in the world peace, right? That was played out through Zionism. And then the final idea, which we're going to talk about now, is the idea of political Zionism. Of the idea of what I mentioned before, that just like every nation had its own country, the Jewish nation should also have its own country. Okay? We mentioned before about the Dreyfus trial, that French officer. So, as the story goes, one of the journalists who covered the Dreyfus trial was a Viennese journalist by the name of Theodor Herzl. Okay? Theodor Herzl was a secular Jew. He knew he was Jewish. He was proud of the fact that he was Jewish. He wasn't religious in any way. And he saw what was happening to Alfred Dreyfus, and he said, "So you see, a Jew will never be accepted in Europe. Yeah? Jews will always be the outsiders." Theodor Herzl came up with this idea of political Zionism, of the Jewish people should have their own home, their own state, their own place where they can go, where the Jews are the ones making rules. Jews will feel safe in their own land. So Herzl comes along in 1897. He hosts essentially the First World Zionist Congress, which he gets together everybody, all the Jews in Europe who want to talk about this idea of Zionism and a Jewish homeland, and starts the political process of advocating for and building up the idea of Zionism as an actual movement where the result will be a homeland for the Jews. Now, Herzl himself was not a religious person in any way. He would have been happy to have not necessarily Palestine. Right? He was offered Uganda. There was a whole discussion about that. Yeah, but certainly for a lot of the people who were involved in the early Zionistic movement, for them, it was Palestine or nothing. But there were different opinions about these things.
Space? Like which country? Sorry, I missed that one. Whereabouts?
He was Viennese in Vienna.
Yeah.
The first Congress was in Switzerland, in Basel.
Okay.
It was Western Europeans.
Okay.
Young, or was he murdered?
He did die young. It's actually quite tragic. Basically, he died young, and none of his children were Jewish. They assimilated. A couple of them were killed, and a few of them, like his son married a non-Jew and didn't have any Jewish children, and yeah, it's quite a sad end to the story. Okay, so things are starting to change in Europe. People's attitudes are starting to change, and people's attitudes towards Palestine are starting to change. So that gets us to the next stage, which is Palestine and the changes to the Middle East. Now, this is very important. Jared and I were talking about this before. For most of what we would call the Middle Ages, Palestine was part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Okay, the Turkish Ottoman Empire included most of what we would think of today as the Arab countries. The Middle East, up into Turkey, all the way across into Pakistan, all the Middle East. Yeah, Egypt, North Africa. What's that?
No, nothing.
Okay. So for 400 years, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, and it wasn't a particularly important part.
Was it still called Palestine, or is that whole area just called the Ottoman Empire?
It was just the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
The Ottoman Empire wasn't...
I guess my point is that you said the Romans called the area of Israel Palestine as kind of an insult to the Jews.
Yeah.
But then when does it stop being Palestine or is it just absorbed by the Ottoman Empire?
Right.
Not really called
the Ottoman Empire wasn't an empire of separate countries.
Yeah.
Right? For example, when you think of the USSR was, let's take a whole bunch of countries that already exist and put an umbrella over them called the USSR,
Yeah.
right? United States of America. Let's take a whole bunch of individual states that all exist as individual states, and let's put them under a umbrella. The Turkish Ottoman Empire, it was just a Turkish Ottoman Empire. There weren't countries there before that they had any sort of nationalistic identity, right? So you have to go back to the times when the Jews were there at the end of the Second Temple period to find Palestine being a political entity with a separate government and a separate, yeah? From that period all the way through until essentially the end of the World War One, let's say, it was just part of the Muslim empire, which then became the Turkish Ottoman Empire. And again, it wasn't even a particularly important part of it. There was nothing in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a desolate wasteland. There was nothing in the land of Israel, right? It wasn't large cities. It wasn't populated. There was nothing going on there at all. In World War One, the Turkish Ottoman Empire sided with Germany, which means they lost the war. So what happens when you lose a war is that the winners get to divide up your territory. So the Turkish Ottoman Empire loses World War One, and after World War One, the territory that was previously part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire is divided up between the British and the French. Okay? What we think of today as the Middle East is a modern invention post-World War One. Okay? This is very, very important to understand.
Yes.
One more thing. Right before the end of World War One, 1917, England was desperate for America to get involved in the war. Right? Essentially, America won two world wars. Are you waving at me? Okay, won 2 world wars, and they didn't really want to get involved, and the Allies did want to get them involved. So one of the ways that the British thought might help influence America to enter the war was if the well-connected Jews in America would pressure the government to get involved in the war. So the Foreign Secretary, the English Foreign Secretary, Lord Balfour, expressed officially that it was England's intention that were they to win the war, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, you could help us do that, then England would be inclined to establish a Jewish homeland for the Jews in the land of Palestine.
Oh, really?
Okay, so this is famous Balfour Declaration, 1917, where the British government, who at that stage had no control over any of the Middle East, but understood if they won the war, if the Allies won the war, they would be given part of the Middle East, and if they were given part of that included Palestine, they would then look favorably upon the establishment of a Jewish state. Okay. So after World War I, the Allies do win the war. England and France essentially divide up the Middle East between them. So that begins the period called the British Mandate. Okay, British Mandate meaning that the British control parts of the Middle East. And they start creating countries because the British made a whole bunch of deals with people. If you know the story of Lawrence of Arabia, the British made a whole bunch of deals with people during World War I in order to get support from the local Arabs. And they start paying off favors now that they have the land and the territory. So, for example, Iraq was created in 1921 from British Mandate land. Jordan in 1922, Lebanon also in 1922, that was Syrian land. That was French land, sorry. Syria also created in 1946 from French Mandate land that they were given after World War I. Okay, so all of these countries that we think of the modern Middle East are all creations after World War I, where France and England were paying off political favors by creating these countries.
But it wasn't their land. Was it their land?
They won the war, therefore it became their land.
So whoever wins the war,
Yes.
they can do whatever.
Yes. For all of history, and that applies to every war except for Israel. When Israel wins multiple defensive wars, for some reason, they're expected to give back everything they got. But for the rest of the world, for all of mankind's history, if you won the war, you got the stuff.
Wow, that's one thing I
War
never.
was
Yeah.
always about territory.
Texas,
It's not more territory, is it or
Texas was won in a war from Mexico. America took it. We won the war, we're taking the land.
Wow.
Okay?
And then we win a war, we hand over 44 square kilometres back to them to...
So let's fit in Israel into this.
Okay, so between the end of World War One and about 1928, right, now that the English are in control of Palestine, so more Jews come from Europe. Third and fourth waves of Aliyah between the end of World War One and 1928 brings another 115,000 odd Jews from Europe to Palestine, which is now under the control of the British.
Wasn't the original, Balfour Declaration and sort of the land that England had proposed for Israel
Yes.
to be also what is now Jordan?
Yes. Oh, sorry. I said yes for you. The Balfour Declaration. Right. There's a funny story. It's not that funny. But there's a story that goes on the lines of this: that the original declaration was meant to be, the wording was going to be, the establishment of Palestine as the Jewish homeland. One of those weird quirks of history happened, and it ended up being worded as the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, as opposed to not all of Palestine, a part of Palestine. Okay? The original intention was, again, no one else wanted the land. There was nothing there. Yeah? It was up for grabs. England was happy to give it to the Jews if that would get America to enter the war.
Wow.
Question.
Yes.
All of these countries were created here, and I'm sure many others still at that time in the Middle East. Because there were 22 Arab countries, the rest of them, or they...
The further you go...
Iran.
Right, so Iran was not. Iran actually is an interesting... Iran kind of existed as a separate kingdom within the Turkish Ottoman Empire. They were one of the exceptions. They were a country for a long time.
Right, so my question actually is, why did it take so long for British mandate to become the land of Israel, which was actually really, wasn't that a resolution of the...
You're saying why didn't it happen in the 1920s like the other countries?
Yeah.
Okay.
And would have it even happened had it not been for the Holocaust?
Right. So here's what happened. The British were okay with there being a Jewish state in Palestine. The problem was the Arabs who were living there weren't happy with it. And there was massive rioting in the 1920s and 30s and 40s because all of these Jews were coming from Europe to Palestine. Now, in the rest of the Middle East, that wasn't a problem. In Iraq, in Jordan, in Lebanon, the people who were there were people who were there. There was no one new coming, right? But in Palestine, there were Arabs who lived there, and there were Jews who were coming in, and the Arabs weren't happy about that. Now remember, the people who were there were citizens of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. They had no national identity other than that, right? They were the same people who lived in Jordan, who lived in Iraq, who lived in all the other parts of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. They weren't people who had any history of living in Palestine. They were people who had a history of living in the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Okay? Because there was no Palestinian country there. There was no Palestinian people. Yeah? They were just Arabs living...
The flip side of that is they do have a connection to this plot of land that their family have possibly lived on for 100 years.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
true.
We should have had this shiur at Federation Square, I suppose.
On the big screen.
So...
And that's how you start a riot,
yeah,
kids.
totally.
What you're saying is quite a big thing.
So
Yeah, that's
in
where
the
I'm from.
20s and 30s and perhaps most of the 40s, which is quite a long time, almost 30 years,
Yeah.
there were these protests,
Massive riots.
massive riots,
Pogroms against the Jews.
right, and then in 1949...
But
somebody-
here's what you understand. Remember, this is all still run by the British at this point. So the British are refereeing between the Jews and the Arabs.
Right, so for 30 years there's all of this going on, and then in 1949 someone says,
We're almost there. One
Sounds
sec.
like a good idea.
One sec.
Palestine, it's not there yet.
No.
It's not officially
It's still a British mandate.
British land.
It's British land. There are Jews living there and there are Arabs living there, but it is like living in
No man land because
London.
there's no country.
It's a
Oh, so
British
it's
mandate. It is
okay.
controlled by
It's
the
like
British.
in Frankston, that whole area.
Listen to this. There were
So what are you
100.
trying to say?
Listen to this. There were 100,000 British soldiers and policemen
Yeah.
keeping the peace in Palestine.
At that
100,000.
time? Oh, no.
Okay.
No,
There was only about 1.8 million people there in total. 100,000 British soldiers and policemen keeping the peace for 1.8 million.
So 1 in 10 is a policeman.
1 in 18.
Oh, 1 in 8.
Close.
that's a lot of police.
At
Yeah,
the
that's a lot
same
of
at the
police.
same time, England was also doing the same thing in India. There was also a British
Oh.
mandate in India.
Yeah.
Okay, how many? Okay, now there were also 100,000 British soldiers and police in India. But you know what the population of India was?
Yeah, that's like 1 billion.
350 million people.
Oh,
Okay, Jews and Arabs are really hard to
yeah.
referee.
Okay, so.
And what happened was both the Jews and the Arabs started attacking the British as well. Okay? So at this point, England throws up their hands and they say, I know we said we wanted the Middle East, but we've given most of it away. What we have left is Palestine. The Jews and the Arabs are fighting like cats and dogs. We don't want anything to do with this. Like, it's not our problem. So England handed it over to the UN, League of Nations, and said, you guys work out what to do with it.
Oh, so the UN was available then, like was around.
It was called the League of Nations.
Yeah, post World War One, it was a League of
Exactly.
Nations, and it became the United
League of
Nations.
Sounds like something like Superman, like
It
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
DC.
League of
Now,
Nations.
by the way, had there been oil in Palestine, England would not have given it away.
Oh yeah, true.
Okay, but since there was nothing there that they wanted, all there was trouble.
Is there oil in any of those?
Yes,
Only in Europe?
yes. I mean, Iraq in particular has a lot of oil.
And yet England gave it to them.
England set up Iraq as a friendly country
Oh,
who
it's-
would be very
Back and forth.
friendly to the Western world supplying oil
So
to
it's a
them.
major sucker. Okay.
Yeah. In Palestine, there was none of that. There was only problems.
Yeah. Okay.
And yet, it's the old story of, English people didn't want their sons going off and dying in Palestine, like refereeing between Jews and Arabs. Like, just England didn't care. It wasn't their problem.
Alright.
So, England announces that in 1948, we are leaving Palestine. You, United Nations, work out a solution before then, because we are out of here. Okay? So, the famous United Nations partition plan, proposed in 1947, where the land of Palestine would be split between 2 Jewish areas and the rest Arab areas. Okay, so there'd be a state for the Jews and a state for the Arabs in the land of Palestine. Okay, that was the proposal. That, right.
That's how many years after World War II? Like about 1 year?
Well, 1948.
1947, talking 2-3 years. Okay, there are a massive number of Jewish refugees coming to Palestine from Europe. England at first is letting them in, then they're not letting them in, then they're trying to turn them away. That's a whole nother story. We don't have time for that tonight. But the problem was only going to get worse. Okay. So this was the partition plan. Israel, the Jews accepted that partition plan, not because it was a particularly good plan, but anything was better than nothing. The Arabs rejected the plan. Okay? They said, we don't want to have anything to do with this. As far as we're concerned, it's all our land. Okay,
And this all comes down to the Free Palestine situation.
nothing to do with
Nothing
that.
to do with that? Okay.
We'll get there.
Okay.
Okay, so 1948, in May, the British leave. The next day, Israel declares independence. Famous David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister, May 14, 1948. Ben-Gurion announces, by virtue of our national and intrinsic right, and on the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. Okay, for the first time in 2,500 years, the Jews are back in the land of Israel with their own political agency. Right? It's a Jewish country now, under Jewish control, run by Jews for Jews. Okay, 10 minutes later, the White House announces that America will support Israel. Russia announces, everybody else announces as well. And the next day, as the British leave, so the Arab armies, 5 neighboring countries, attack Israel. Okay? The war lasts 8 months. Egypt, Lebanon, Transjordan, what became Jordan, Syria eventually agree to a truce. Iraq never signed a truce. Officially, they're still at war with Israel. And the modern state of Israel is born. Okay.
So, after everything that had happened, and even before this, but let's just say from the British Mandate,
Yes.
that's only for the 30 years. Who came together and said, "Ooh, this looks like a good idea"?
Which bits? The partition plan?
The correction of the state of Israel.
So,
Like, understand where I'm coming
yeah.
from with that.
So
There was nothing about that 30 years that suggested this was a good idea.
again, the British were leaving.
Yeah.
There was violence between Jews and non-Jews, Jews and Arabs, and there needed to be a solution. The British said to the UN, "You find a solution," and the UN came up with a solution. Now, the problem is that the UN is an organization made up of many, many other countries. And there are many different motivations that different countries in the UN had for why they supported the creation state of Israel. Like we mentioned before.
The UN is now a very anti-Israel organization.
Right. So, for example, the reason why Russia supported it was because Russia thought that Israel was going to become a communist nation, a communist country. You're talking the beginning of the Cold War here. America and Russia are starting to use proxies to fight each other. Right? It's 10 years before the Korean War. It's not that, yeah? So America said, well, if Russia's going to support it, we have to support them as well. There was a large Jewish lobby in America for America to support Israel. You had many, many other countries, also countries who had their own nationalistic aspirations who supported Israel because, hey, if the UN's creating countries, we also want to be a country, so let's support each other. Right? Micronesia is a really good example of that. Micronesia supports Israel in every time there's a vote in the UN. Okay?
So they can get some money.
Micronesia is not full of Jew-loving Zionists. But basically, Micronesia was created around the same time and are like, we're the new kids on the block. We have to stick together against the big bad old countries. Right? So there are all sorts of different political and considerations that people had. Right? Germany supported the creation state of Israel out of guilt. Let's be honest about that. Right? A lot of countries in Europe supported Israel as a response to the Holocaust. So there were all different motivations.
Right, but it's just...
Things came together.
Right, but after everything that had been going on for 30 years, I'm not necessarily drawing a direct tie between those two things. But
There is no question that the Holocaust was the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of things, including the creation of the State of Israel. I'm okay with saying that. I don't think it would have happened in the way it happened if not for the Holocaust and the fact that you had millions of Jewish refugees who could no longer live in Europe, who needed somewhere to go, and other countries didn't want them.
Because there were other lands that were offered to...
Really?
Yeah.
Uganda. Yeah, but not really.
No. And I understand the religious and the historical significance of Israel. So I'm using a different part of my brain now to ask this question, but I just feel like
even within the Jewish people, there were forces pulling in different directions. There were religious Zionists, there were secular Zionists, there were political Zionists. There were a lot of deals that were done in order to make it possible for there to be a modern state of Israel. Even within Israel, right?
But after everything that had happened for 30 years, and even before that, what did they, when they looked to the future, what did they think was, did they envision 2023, and everything that's happened since then? What
No,
because you get where I'm coming from. I'm not questioning our state of Israel, but it's just hard to ignore. Was there some degree of foresight into what was potentially going to
No,
be?
no, because there were a lot of other options that the Arab world could have taken. A lot of other options, right? It's not like for the Arabs living in Palestine, it was here or nothing, right? You ever see one of those maps of like Israel versus the Arab world?
Yeah.
Right? There's no reason to think that Israel, this tiny little splinter in the side of the Arab world, would have become such a big thing. But there was also no reason to think that Israel necessarily would have lasted that long either. It wasn't, we take it as a given that of course Israel is a strong country or a wealthy country, right? There was no reason to think that. Israel had no, Palestine had no economy. There was nothing there. It was swamp and it was desert.
And by rights, after the initial war, we should have been destroyed.
It was swamps and desert and dead Jews.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, think about this. Jews from Europe who were refugees got off the boats, they gave them a rifle, and they went to fight for Israel's independence. There are graves in Israel that are marked Plony Ben Plony, which is like John Doe. So we don't know who this person is. We know it's a Jew who came from Europe on a boat, went out to fight, and got killed. And no one even had time to write down his name. Right? The modern state of Israel is... I remember 20 years ago in Israel, people used to take suitcases of tuna fish and cheese from America because you couldn't get it in Israel. Like, what's that stat? I had this really good stat. I saw this today and I wrote it down because I thought it was really cool. I did type it down, that's true. Yeah, in 1948, there was food rationing in Israel. Right? There wasn't enough food for people. In 1997, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, removed Israel from the list of developing countries. It was no longer a third world country, now it's a first world country. Okay, Israel now has the 19th highest standard of living in the world, of all the countries. Okay? It's not normal that in 75 years, Israel went from being nothing to being what it is today. It's not normal. Right? Again, we talk about the arc of Jewish history. It's not normal. Okay? When we talk about this bit, this is not normal. This doesn't happen after 2,500 years of exile. That doesn't happen after Holocaust and pogroms and crusades and everything, destruction of 2 temples and everything we've been through. That doesn't happen. But it did. It's not normal. Okay? We're almost finished. Okay? We've got another few minutes and we're going to tie this all together. I'm going to read you my favorite quote. Yes, Rabbi.
I just want to picture when Ben Gurion declared the state.
Yes.
Did he declare
May 14, 1948.
the whole land or just the bits the UN said was supposed to be Israel's?
He declared a state in the according to UN partition plan.
Yeah.
But what happened was in the War of Independence,
Yeah.
they won other parts of the land as well.
Got it.
Yeah, because it looked a little different on that picture.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
That's what they're fighting.
Yes.
for.
So the original intention
Like,
was,
they kept to whatever the UN said.
had the Arabs accepted the plan as well,
Yeah.
then Israel would have been 2 blobs in Palestine. Yeah. Again, I read it, but I didn't point it out. When Ben Gurion declared independence, we hereby declare the establishment of Jewish state in Palestine.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Not Palestine as a Jewish state.
Good.
The
Okay.
Jewish state is a subset of Palestine.
I just wanted to understand when we knew the Arabs rejected it before we declared the state.
Yes, they never accepted it.
So it's not like we said, well, stuff them, then we'll take the whole lot. We just declared what we are in for our part of the partition plan.
In 1948.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Those are the questions you're asking.
I think he shot himself in the foot.
There are 3
Saying it that way.
There are 3 factors I just want to mention that are defining characteristics of the land of Israel. Okay? The modern state of Israel. And these are absolutely important to understand because these 3 things affect everything that happens in Israel. Okay? The first thing is mass immigration. Yeah? In 1948, there were about 600,000 Jews living in the land of Egypt. The land of Egypt. The land of Israel. That's the Pesach
So what's
class.
the number again?
600,000
In 48.
in 48. Anybody know how many people there are in Israel today?
8 million.
13.
No, isn't it 9?
Yeah, 9.3. 75%
1.3 million.
75% Jewish, 20% Arab.
What's that again?
20% Arab of the population.
Yeah.
75% Jewish, 20% Arab, 5% mix and match. Jews, Christians, undefined, yeah, whatever. What?
Does that that includes who lives in Gaza?
No, they're not
No.
Israelis.
So that's a separate number.
Completely separate. Israeli citizens.
How many Arabs were living in what is now Israel in 48? If there were 800,000 Jews, what did you say there was?
600,000. So here's the problem. In 48, when the Arab countries attacked, right? I mean, they knew Israel was going to declare independence because the British said we're leaving on this. Like everybody knew what was happening, right? It was telegraphed a long way out. So the neighboring Arab countries said, Arabs who are in the parts that will become Israel, you should leave
Yeah.
so as not to get caught up in the fighting. After we win the war, you will move back. So there were two responses from the Arabs. Some Arabs left and they became refugees because the other countries didn't say, we will take, you can become Jordanian, you can become Egyptian, you can be, no. They said temporarily we'll put you in a refugee camp while we win the war and then you'll go back afterwards.
And they're still in refugees.
Correct, which are really high-rise cities. The other response was there are Arabs who stayed in Israel and said, no thank you, yeah, we're happy to stay right here, and they became Israeli Arabs.
And
Israel gave them citizenship. That's why you have Palestinians who are Israeli Arabs and Palestinians who are in refugee camps.
There are videos and things that talk about Jews expelling Arabs from Israel.
Oh my god, we did the worst genociders actually that ever existed.
No, but
So
bad
the
at
Arabs
it.
left. In general, the Arabs left. Obviously, there are exceptions to every rule, but in general, the Arabs left.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, they were promised that they would go back.
They listened to the wrong side.
But then also, none of those brotherhoods took them in either.
100%. Okay, I want to finish this off,
Yep.
and then we can
Sorry.
open it up to random
If I
things.
can
Okay.
almost say so, why don't I open my hand?
So basically, the population of Israel, after 3 years it doubled, after 6 years it tripled, after 25 years it increased fivefold. The population increased and increased and increased, and it's not because Jews have so many kids; it's because of immigration, right? Most of European Jewry left Europe, unfortunately some in coffins, but a lot came to Palestine, right? Even today, right, making aliyah to Israel is a thing from America, from Australia, from South Africa, from other European countries, right? So the population of Israel is mostly made up, not mostly, is almost entirely made up of people who have come from other countries. That creates a tremendously difficult social fabric because you're not talking about people who are all the same. What do a Yemenite Jew and an Australian Jew have in common? Nothing, other than the fact that they're both Jewish. Yeah, Jews from Europe had a complete, Jews from Eastern Europe, from Russia, had a completely different life to the Jews from Western Europe, from France and England.
Admittedly, when you're all dancing at the cocktail, you feel like you've got a lot in common.
Oh, so what we all have in common is the fact that we're Jewish,
Yeah.
right? But everything else, so one of the defining characteristics of Israel is that it is completely eclectic. You can find every kind of person in Israel, and what they all share in common is that they are Jewish and they now live in Israel. And that's about it. Everything else for the last 2,000 years has been different. That's the first defining characteristic. And you see that in the army, you see that in politics, you see that all over the place. You see it in the food, right? It's a real thing. The second thing I want to point out...
It's just miraculous that we still get on.
Yes, because what we have in common is the fact that we're Jewish. Okay, the second fact I want to talk about is the idea of diaspora. Again, this is a thing that we all know, we take for granted, and it makes no sense, and you won't find another example of it. The majority of Jews in the world don't live in Israel. That's a little bit nuts. Meaning...
Not all of us like deserts. Some of us like
Okay, I'm not questioning why that's the case. That's just as much as it's a historical reality, right? We weren't there and we haven't gone back yet. So the idea of us Jews in the diaspora feel a very strong connection to the Jews in Israel. We send them money, we support them, we go visit them, but we don't live there. We're not Israeli citizens. What we have in common is the fact that we're Jewish. And again, Jewish communities all around the world in very, very different places all have this connection to Israel. And here's something even more weird. Israel as a country feels a sense of connection and responsibility for Jews in the diaspora. Okay? Whether it is helping Jews make Aliyah, yeah, things like Operation Magic Carpet, flying Jews from Yemen, from Ethiopia, help them make Aliyah. Whether it's things like Entebbe, right, going to another country to rescue Israelis.
They paid after the Iranian Revolution in 1978. They paid
To bring
each-
Jews to...
Yeah,
yeah.
each Iranian families at the time.
You have Jews in America lobbying the American government to support Israel, and you have Jews in Israel lobbying the Israeli government to affect policies affecting Jews in other countries. Like, it's very strange. It's very strange. Yeah?
Is that similar? Like, does any other religion or something do that? Where the only
What happens to other people is when they move to a country, they assimilate and become that country. They break off the ties to where they came from before. Again, it's because we're Australian Jews who were Jewish Australians.
Yeah, but is there any other country?
We
where
are, and Rabbi Safar went like this, yeah? But we have multiple personalities as Jews,
Okay.
right? We have our Jewish hat on, and we also have our Australian hat on. He doesn't like it when I hijack mental health terms. Yeah.
Like, Shrine.
Okay.
No, just another added hat.
Yeah, no, I get it. Like, we wear different hats. Like, during the week we wear a kapata, then we
But
wear a
there's
stripe,
no
then we
other
wear
country though. I know that does the same thing. Like people in France, but they help all the French people.
Well, you don't
No,
actually.
so
speak-
France has colonies around the world.
Oh,
They're
okay.
French territories.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, true.
Yeah, Algeria was a French colony. Noumea was a French colony. Yeah, but France isn't helping the French people who live in Australia.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, but
France doesn't lobby for people like in Australia, and also like you don't get.
Remember, the French people in
Well, if a
Australia who
Jew
aren't
got-
even French citizens.
if a Jewish person got arrested here and went to court, there would be lobbies from Israel to the Australian government.
There would.
Countries.
If someone's being kidnapped or something, they would
Countries
jump on
protect
it.
their citizens all over
So,
the
so,
world.
but this is something else. We're not citizens of Israel,
No.
right? We have a relationship with a country that we're not a citizen of. What we have in common with them is that we're all Jewish. That's the point. Where it's
That's what's so
it's
good about
not a country. It's not like we're Israeli citizens who live in Australia. We're not Israeli citizens.
Yeah, but I don't.
No, we are Israeli citizens.
I don't
we
think
haven't got
Israel-
a paper.
Not yet.
Protects any Jew around,
I think Israel does a tremendous amount for world Jewry outside of Israel. Again,
Right.
Israel
Yeah,
has
but
a
not on an individual.
Israel has a cabinet position. There's a minister responsible for Jews in the diaspora.
Are you planning on committing a
Yeah,
holiday?
like that's not normal.
No, I'm just-
That's not normal. Australia doesn't have a minister responsible for non-Australian citizens.
Yeah, because it doesn't.
Like,
right, 'cause that's-
it's not a thing. It's not a
country
thing.
doesn't work. Yeah, well,
Do you think
Okay,
we can't
third
get to the
factor.
point England will come
Third
after
factor. Third factor.
No, they got rid of their
Third
capital
factor
already.
is the neighbours.
Nice.
Okay, Arab hostility against Israel. Very, very quickly. 1948, War of Independence. 1956, Suez Crisis. 1967, Six-Day War. 67 to 70, War of Attrition. 73, Yom Kippur War. 82, War in Lebanon. 87 to 93, First Intifada. 94, no, skip that one. 2000, Second Intifada. 2006, Second Lebanon War. 2008, War in Gaza, the first time round. 2012, War in Gaza, the second time round. 2014, War in Gaza, the third time round. And 2023, the latest installment of War in Gaza.
Oh my god.
And hopefully the last
that
one.
includes rockets just randomly being fired over
Every day.
Yes,
Any other day of the week.
these are actual wars.
Where a fight breaks out for a few days and then it's...
Yes, it's not including terrorism, blowing up buses and things like that. Yes,
So
Israel's...
at the start when I said it,
That's
like
like a weekend
like a
flavour.
war.
That's right.
You're
Yeah.
bringing it up now.
These are like
It is
serious.
War, and understand, war is a tremendously destabilizing force for any country, particularly a small country like Israel. A country like Israel that does not have much of a standing army. They have to call up reserves when there is a war on. The entire economy stops. The country stops because you take all of the military-age people, right, and you send them to the army.
So the other three Gaza wars,
Yes.
were they, obviously I don't remember back in those days, so were they as big as this one, or did other countries get involved? Like the whole world got involved in
Israel
those three?
stopped before they finished the job. Because of international pressure,
Oh, okay.
ceasefires were put in place.
Yep.
So Hamas attacked,
Yep.
Israel went in, there was a war for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then Israel pulled out before they finished the job.
Sounds familiar right now.
No.
We hope it'll be different this time. Okay, I want to just...
But was the rest of the world sort of involved, like,
Yeah.
they
Of
were?
course.
Not
Of
involved
course.
from a cut it out right now like they are right now.
Yeah.
How dare you defend yourself, Jews?
Is it
Why
that-
can't you just
so
die
is it
quietly?
that-
No, it was actually, you
Actually,
can
you'll
defend yourself in the
find
first
that
week.
you'll
Well,
actually
you're not allowed
find
to
most
actually
countries
do anything
are not
serious.
saying that right now.
Okay,
In 2000
we'll get there. I don't want to get there yet. That was just me being funny. Okay.
Everyone loves to throw that out, but that's actually
Okay.
not true.
Okay, 1 sec. All right. I just want let's just finish this material and then we can talk about what's happening today. Okay. Here's what I want to do.
It is fucked up.
That must be French. In 1996, the then president of Israel, Asa Weitzman,
So
gave a
which year?
speech. What?
What year did you say?
1996.
1996. Okay.
You remember 1996, right?
Yep. Yep.
Vaguely she does.
I remember.
Does
that.
anybody have a cultural reference from 1996?
Cultural reference.
I'll take a music, a movie. I'll take a food. I'll take dress styles.
Darren Bevan did the star jump off a horse.
Who?
Melbourne Cup. It was a very big.
Okay,
spectacle.
go away.
Oh my god.
Does anybody have a real
was
cultural
there.
reference that other
I
people
I was
know?
actually doing my
1996.
GCSEs.
Anybody? I'll take a
That's
movie. I'll take a song. I'll take.
Seriously,
97,
Darren
I
Bevan
can
jumped
give
off a
you
horse.
Spice
It's a very
Girls.
big thing.
We were living in England.
Spice
were
Girls?
Huge.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Spice Girls
Yeah, they
was
were.
big.
You remember the Spice Girls? 1996.
Spice Girls. Yep.
Okay, there you
Do
go.
you remember actually?
I was 17, I finally hit puberty, that 1996. Okay, now I remember.
Nice.
I was 1 year old.
And I wasn't born yet.
Mum,
You were one?
Sorry,
I was
what?
1. 96. I was
Okay.
1.
She's such a baby.
You
So the president of Israel, Asa Weitzman, gives a speech to both houses of the German parliament, which was a big deal at the time. I want to read to you part of his speech. And it's a little bit long, I'm sorry, but I actually think it's brilliant.
Where is he? Is he? Sorry, which country is he?
He's in Germany,
Germany?
speaking to the houses of the parliament, which is a big deal for the Israeli president. I believe he was the first Israeli president to visit Germany.
Oh, it's Harry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Post World War II.
How very brave of him.
Okay. Says President Weitzman, "It was fate that delivered me and my contemporaries into the great era when the Jews returned to re-establish their homeland. I am no longer a wandering Jew who migrates from country to country, from exile to exile. But all Jews in every generation must regard themselves as if they had been in previous generations, places and events. Therefore I am still a wandering Jew, but not along the far-flung paths of the world. Now I migrate through the expanses of time, from generation to generation down the paths of memory. Memory shortens distances. 200 generations have passed since my people first came into being, and to me they seem like a few days. Only 200 generations have passed since a man named Abraham rose up and left his country and birthplace for the country that is mine today. Only 200 generations have elapsed from the day that Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah in the city of Hebron to the murderous conflicts that have taken place that are in my generation. Only 150 generations have passed from the pillar of fire of the exodus from Egypt to the pillars of smoke from the Holocaust. And I, a descendant of Abraham, born in Abraham's country, have witnessed them all. I was a slave in Egypt. I received the Torah on Mount Sinai. Together with Joshua, I crossed the Jordan River. I entered Jerusalem with David and was exiled with Hezekiah. But I did not forget it by the rivers of Babylon. When the Lord returned the captives of Zion, I dreamed among the builders of its ramparts. I fought the Romans and was banished from Spain. I was bound to the stake in Mainz. I studied Torah in Yemen, and I lost my family in Kishinev. I was incinerated in Treblinka, rebelled in Warsaw, and immigrated to the land of Israel, the country from where I have been exiled and where I have been born, and from where I come, and from where I shall return. I am a wandering Jew who follows in the footsteps of his forebears. And just as I escorted them there and then, so do my forebears accompany me and stand here with me today. The sharp-sighted among you will be able to discern them, a retinue of prophets and peasants, kings and rabbis, scientists, soldiers, craftsmen, and children. Some died advanced years in their beds, some went up in flames, still others fell by the sword. I am a wandering Jew with a cloak of memory around my shoulders and the staff of hope in my hand. I stand at the great crossroads in time, at the end of the 20th century. I know whence I come, and with hope and with apprehension, I attempt to find out where I'm heading. We are all people of memory and prayer. We are people of words and hope. We have neither established empires nor built castles and palaces. We have only placed words on top of each other. We have fashioned ideas. We have built memorials. We have dreamed towers of yearning, of Jerusalem rebuilt, of Jerusalem united, of a peace that will swiftly and speedily establish us in our days. Amen.
Wow.
I really like that. Okay,
They made it difficult back then.
they did. The Jewish people started with one person. Okay, we started our journey with Abraham. Abraham's great contribution to the world was monotheism. The understanding that there is one God and one God has a personal relationship with us. That mankind has a mission. There is a purpose to life. Life is not random. History is not random. We Jews are a tiny speck in the big picture of world history. And yet we've been everywhere and we've done everything. Mark Twain said like this: if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. If only we were 1%. We're not 1%. It suggests a nebulous dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to have been heard of. But he is heard of, has always been heard of. He could vain himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now or have vanished. The Jews saw them all, beat them all, is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakness of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass. He remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Asks Mark Twain. I want to tell you what I think are the two takeaways from Jewish history. Okay? The first takeaway is that God runs the world. Okay? We may not be able to see it on a day-to-day basis, but if you look at the arc of Jewish history, it's there. It doesn't make any sense that we are here. It doesn't make any sense that we are thriving. It doesn't make any sense that we still exist. As David Ben Gurion, the first president of Israel, said, a Jew who doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist.
How did that person become...
One sec.
Yeah.
More than 300 years ago, the French King Louis IX asked his advisor, the great philosopher Pascal, he said, prove to me, Pascal, that the supernatural exists. Give me an example of something that is miraculous. And Pascal said, the Jews, your majesty, the Jews. Okay, Pascal wrote a book and he explained that the survival of the Jewish people is nothing short of a miracle. And he was talking about, 250 years ago. Think of all the things we've been through since then. The second takeaway that I think is important is this idea of the Jewish people have a mission. We're here to fulfill a purpose. God says to Abraham, you will be an eternal nation. Okay? That is very important because the eternal nation, the Jewish people, are made up of individuals. And the eternal nation, the Jewish people, will be there at the end of time. We will complete our mission. Things will work out for the Jews. I promise you. I guarantee it. But the decision, the choice that every one of us has to make is, do we want to be a part of the Jewish people? See, we know the end of the story for the Jewish people. But you, I and you and all of you have to decide if we want to be part of that journey or not. Because the reality is, in the last 3,500 years, there are Jews who have stepped out. They've dropped off. They assimilated. Yeah? I don't know what percentage of the world out there is really Jewish, they just don't know it. But there's got to be a lot of people. Right? Being Jewish and being a part of the national mission of the Jewish people is a choice. And it's a choice that we all have to make. Right? And you'll make it based upon who you marry, and you make it based on how you spend your time, and you'll make it based on whether you engage in Jewish activities, whether you keep any of the mitzvahs, whether you give your kids a Jewish education. Like, all of these things are choices that we make. And they're all part of us all deciding if we want to be a part of the national mission of the Jewish people. Jewish history is miraculous. It is crazy. It makes no sense. And we are living through times right now that are also crazy. Right? I'm happy to talk about some of the stuff going in the world now, but the truth is we are living through a moment right now where every one of us has the opportunity to stand up and say, I am a Jew, and I'm proud of it, or to run away and hide. And I have to tell you, I've spoken to a lot of people in Israel, and I don't personally know anyone who has left Israel in the last month. I know a lot of people who have said, I am staying. Okay, my sister happens to be in Israel at the moment. My son happens to be in Israel at the moment. I have a lot of friends there. And people in Israel see it as this is a defining moment for the Jewish people. This is a stand up and be counted moment.